Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. Arsenal have fallen 5 points off the pace in the Premier League after drawing with Manchester City. And in the boardroom, there's also changes as well. So how much do they have to do to catch Liverpool? Right, with us today, we have the Athletic's David Ornstein. We've also got Adam Crafton as well. Adam, let's start with you on this. Mikel Arteta said after the game he was very disappointed not to win. But we have to talk about the selection, especially in that midfield. No Eze, Rice, Mourinho, Zubimendi made a start. What did you make of it and the team that he picked?
I think it's what we've come to expect from Mikel Arteta in these big games. I think if you'd have said to most people before the game, how do you think Arteta will go about it? It was probably this. I think there's clearly a section of the fan base at the moment, maybe a growing section actually after yesterday as well, who would like it to be a bit more expansive from the start, who would like it to be a bit more brave and risk-takey. I think what the counterweight to that is that Arsenal do have this really pretty good record against big six teams going back a few years now, and he feels that he's worked out a way not to lose these games. Obviously, the recent game against Liverpool, there was some criticism after that. I thought some of that was a bit unfair, to be honest, given how they limited Liverpool at Anfield, which we don't normally see. But yesterday, I think a lot of people just saw an opportunity for Arsenal actually against a Manchester City team that still it doesn't look like a Pep Guardiola team at the moment, whatever they're currently doing, as good as Haaland is. And Arsenal didn't really take that. So I think that's where yesterday comes from. I don't think it's in isolation. It's like this pattern that's building up of, are Arsenal making the most of the talent that they now have at their disposal, or are they just being a little bit too cautious?
Yeah, were they a bit cautious, David? Do you think Arteta could have been a bit more risky, I guess, in his approach?
He could be. I think the reaction in every direction has been way OTT on this, especially on social media, typically. Because, and I don't just mean for Arsenal, for Man City as well, because everybody's talking about their sort of record low ball possession and the style of play that Pep Guardiola deployed. I guess that's not as big a story because they've been there, done that, won everything. And as we talked about on this programme last week, it may be the final season of Pep Guardiola. Let's see. Whereas with Arteta, Arsenal fans, the public, the media, see them kind of in the earlier stages of their journey, trying to win trophies and get over the line. And so it's a much bigger talking point. And yeah, there is this reputation that seems to be following Arteta around now that he's a little bit handbrake on and that he needs to let loose a little bit. I think that's an easy accusation for all of us to throw at him. He has done fantastically well to bring Arsenal up to competitive level again. 3 second-place finishes in a row is not to be sniffed at. A Champions League semi-final last season, which could easily have been a final. They did take the handbrake off away to PSG. They didn't manage to finish their chances. And they look like they'll challenge again this season. And they've built a squad that is deeper and better than ever under his reign. And I guess that's where the frustration is born out of from sections of the Arsenal fan base, that they're just so desperate now to get over the line and they've got the tools and resources in their mind to do so. And so when you see, say, a Mourinho and a Trossard who seem to be at the centre of all the conversation picked and similarly at Anfield, you think, and then you get the commentary from sort of well-placed former players and pundits, and then that becomes the discourse that permeates throughout the game. You do ask yourself, what could he have done differently? I always look at it in a more balanced perspective. If he had played with Eze from the start, I probably would have, given the magnitude of the signing and the skills he brings. But he didn't have the best game in Bilbao a few days earlier. And Trossard actually played quite well against City. It was more, should he have been in the number 10 role in the absence of Martin Odegaard? But there's every chance, hypothetically speaking, that they'd gone for it and conceded 2 or 3 goals in the first half against City. And then everybody would have been destroying Arteta for that. as it happened, maybe a touch conservative in the first half. They opened up in the second half. They did get their equaliser. It's no disgrace to be having such a good record against Manchester City and in top 6 games under Mikel Arteta, and to be picking up a point against them now in the grand scheme of things, especially in the circumstances of what happened in that match. And like, Arsenal are, by the looks of it, going to be up there this season. They need to start converting some of these big matches from draws or defeats into wins, yes. But I don't think it's anywhere near as dramatic as a lot of people are making out. I don't think they're far off. I do think they can do it under Mikel Arteta, and some who are going to the extreme of saying any other manager would have, be making this team into, multiple title winners, Premier League, Champions League, domestic cups. I just don't think that's realistic. And so, nothing's perfect. Mikel Arteta may have some regrets about it, but I don't think it was a disaster that it seems to be being portrayed in some quarters. And if it is, that is testament to how far Arsenal under Arteta have come and the shift in expectations that surrounds them.
Yeah, does that level of expectation also change, Adam, with the likes of Gyokeres obviously coming in? Arsenal have needed that number 9 for ages, and can't help but see Erling Haaland just peel off beautifully and score that lovely goal. I mean, there is a comparison to be made, but perhaps a little too early, because Gyokeres is probably just still finding his feet in the Premier League.
In some ways, yes, but in other ways, I don't think anyone can really imagine Gyokeres ever being at the level of Haaland. I don't think that's an unfair. Haaland's level is just so high that it's hard to imagine Gyokeres, as good as he may end up being that good. I mean, like the sprint he did yesterday for the goal, like when his head goes down, it was like a racehorse, like entering the final furlong, sprint, sort of going beyond everyone else. It was incredible. I think. I just that comparison I struggle. I don't think also being a centre forward for Arsenal is so easy. They're not a team that create in these big games a lot of chances. They've not really made a chance for him in any of these big games so far this season. And it's okay. Sometimes you want a striker to just, a bit like Haaland yesterday, kind of make something happen. But the way Manchester City was set up, yesterday wasn't just about Arsenal. It was also about the way Man City set up in the game. There was never really that space that emerged for Arsenal, apart from bizarrely, like deep into added time, where City's line went so high, and then you had that space in behind that Martinelli benefited from. I guess I think the frustration for people comes from the fact that you can see Arteta doing all this brilliant work, and you can see the progress of the team, and you're just there either as a neutral or I imagine as an Arsenal fan, just being like, just go that final 2%, 5%, because they're so close. They're so close. You look at the quality that they now have across their squad, and it does just feel like they're holding back in some way, like they're not sort of emptying everything onto the pitch. I don't mean they're not committed or determined. It's just, are they doing absolutely everything in their powers, in their talent powers, to unlock these games? And I'm not sure that they necessarily are. And I don't think that means, I don't think it means like you change the manager or anything dramatic like that. It's just, can the manager just find that balance? Because ultimately, with the defence, you've basically got 4 centre-backs playing often. You've got at least 2 holding midfielders. So like, could you put an Adey in from the start in a central position instead of Mourinho maybe? Would that be such a, because probably if Odegaard was fit, he would play instead of Mourinho, you would think, right? In that game. So you could play Adey in that position. Maybe it's just, if it was 3 weeks later and Adey had been at the club a couple more weeks, he would start, who we'll see in time to come. But I think it's that kind of thing that Arsenal fans look at maybe and just think, come on.
But where does that come from, though? Where does that come from, Adam? Like, where they're going to get that from? It has to be the manager. Surely it has to be the coaching staff to say, lads, just go out there and take some risks.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of that. I think it was a really interesting press conference from what I saw after the game, where I don't think Arteta liked the question he was asked about I think he was asked about the 3-man midfield and can you explain, why you set up that way? I think the journalists were looking for a kind of a line, in terms of, this is the thing people are talking about. Let's hear Arteta talk about it. But I think they're probably also looking for insight into the way he thinks about this and why he feels it's so necessary in these big games. And he didn't really give an answer. It was a kind of, maybe he did in other interviews, I didn't see everything he did on TV, but it's certainly in the press conference, it seemed like it grated on him to be asked about it. He then sort of said something like, well, you didn't ask about it when we won in Bilbao the other night, which is a fair point. But it had that kind of slightly aloof air that coaches sometimes take on when things haven't quite gone right in a game, where they really don't actually want to be asked anything technical or tactical. Then if we'd have asked something about something silly off the pitch, they don't want to talk about that either at times. So sometimes, coaches do sort of just become a bit spiky in those circumstances. And I think maybe that's an indication that Arteta knows, he'll have known that all the post-match yesterday would have been, people like Jamie Carragher, Roy Keane, Gary Neville saying, Arsenal need to take a risk, Arsenal need to win these games, Arteta needs to do more. And I'm sure he'll be very conscious of that.
A really good point, and many managers would have reacted to that question, like Adam points out. I always feel in these situations, and I don't want to play down the level of experience of the former players or of insight of people that work in our part of the industry or the intelligence of the public and fan base. But I also, for that token, understand how managers are sitting there basically being told that everybody knows better than them when we're sat in our armchairs and we're sort of pontificating over their profession and their training and studying and working on this from a physical, literal data perspective every day of the week. And that doesn't mean they're perfect by any means, but they're better qualified to judge than us. And if you say, well, some of these managers become a bit blinkered at times or too wedded to a certain style or system, then they need to be challenged by their assistants and maybe even their sporting directors ahead of us. Now, we're perfectly entitled to, but we're not as well placed to know everything that goes on here. And it was a really interesting point Adam made when he said it looks like to Arsenal fans. So a lot of this is optics. So they want a swashbuckling performance. They want, even you said it there, Io, why don't they just go and take another risk? It's not quite that simple when you're playing anybody, let alone a Manchester City and Liverpool, the two examples we use here. Manchester City were sort of encamped in their own half last night, not easy against any opposition, let alone one of such high level who seemed to ditch in that instance the way they play. Even Pep said it after the game. That's not what he wants to see from his team. And so you've got this vision, if you're Arsenal fans or the public, when you see all the transfers and all the attacking talent they have at their disposal. And why aren't they just going hell for leather? Just let loose. Unleash the shackles. And then you've got the history of what Arsenal fans have seen, which is when they've won titles under Wenger, it was pretty free-flowing. Even when they were losing, they went for it at Highbury, in particular with your Thierry Henrys and your Dennis Bergkamps and Lundbergs and Pires and Vieiras, and they found ways through. And many of us remember it. Then you look at the optics of who wears the number 14 now. It's Gyokeres, who's an extremely high-level striker who's already made an impact for them in a way that strikers in the Premier League so far, who are also new to it, haven't. And also people are giving lots of time to certain other players in the Premier League, but they don't seem to be giving that to Gyokeres, the analysis over every performance. And maybe part of it is because it's Arsenal and the expectation and the pressures. Maybe it's because of that number 14 on his back. And you're used to seeing, if you're an Arsenal fan of a certain vintage, Thierry Henry, or even an Aubameyang. And in Henry's case, the most graceful and prolific and damaging of players, with goal scoring records and such. I always think back to him being like almost swan-like in the way he glided through, or ballerina-like in the way his athleticism merged eventually over time, by the way, with goals and trophies ultimately. And Gyokeres is a completely different type of player, and so he's not, this halcyon vision of somebody sort of being really easy on the eye of everyone might be a bit different to the reality of that he's going to score goals. Adam pointed out that the service, that's an incredibly important factor in all of this. He was served by Adey in their previous home game on a plate, and he finished. He also did try and create for himself when he ran round the back, you'll remember, and then crashed a shot against the post. Apart from that, he hasn't had a huge... I can't remember any glaring chances he's missed. He was in Leeds, in the Leeds game, I think he was wrong-footed in one incident, and it happened again yesterday when there was a deflection off the foot of a Man City player, and he was slightly ahead of the ball. But I've not seen him do anything wrong. Thierry Henry himself actually picked up on Bilbao how when he was sent clear, his first touch wasn't as good as it should have been. It should have put him through on goal, and it took him wide, and he got snuffed out. But we're really picking over fine margins here, and so yeah, there's the risk taking. That's such a basic point, and I don't disagree with it. But there is so much more to it.
But don't you think that, it was just even listening to you then, like the way you're talking about players from 20 years ago and the excitement that's coming through from your voice, I think actually, I'm not putting words in your mouth here, but it just the kind of stirring that you just had thinking about those games kind of underlines that, yes, they just felt a bit underwhelming, and you're craving those moments again, right? You're craving some players to take those risks and be allowed to take those risks. And instead, what we often see, and Arsenal get huge praise for this. I've praised them for this, and it's important. The set pieces, but it does slow the game down. The long throws, the corners. Like yesterday, there's 11 corners in the game. Great, Arsenal are getting corners, and every time they get one, if Arsenal aren't your team, you're there, basically cracking yourself, thinking what they're going to do here. But from a momentum of the game perspective, it's not fast enough at times when they're attacking or when they're chasing a game. And there are times where I watch them and I think, surely you're better than like attempting long throws when you're chasing a game trying to win the Premier League. And I know every team is kind of doing it now this season, but I kind of just feel like they're better than that. Their players are better than that. And kind of want to see a bit more of it.
Yeah, and so you want to see if they can be the sum of their parts, which looks amazing on paper, and maybe even more than that. You want to see all hell break loose, and we don't really care about the negative side of that because it's that intrigue. And maybe when you're referring to 20 years ago, that's at times what Arsenal did under Wenger, where, with total respect to such a successful manager, now it's very different in the way Mikel Arteta, like Pep Guardiola, who he's learned under, they are managing sort of every element of what's going on the pitch and where their team are moving and how they are set up and what duties they're performing. There was a small sort of, and sometimes you don't want to bring attention to this, but there was a small section of the fan base on social media, and it made it into Mikel Arteta's press conference ahead of the match, where he was asked about a social media clip of himself, Arteta, sort of giving very vocal instructions to Adey to stay strictly in whatever position it was, really close to the touchline, when people want to see Adey being allowed to be a free spirit, coming inside, conjuring play. Well, whatever the rights and wrongs of that point, it reminds you of, say, a Jack Grealish, who came to City as this free spirit and everyone wanted to see it recreated at Man City, and people felt he was put in a tactical straitjacket and he had to follow out the instructions, which ultimately helps him be part of a historic treble-winning team and win many more trophies and have success. Some people feel he still didn't fulfill his potential at City. Others say most players would die to have that kind of CV and medal collection. So totally agree, and we all want to see if Arsenal can go to where we all think they can go. But my only point is it is probably not as simplistic. And if that didn't work and they got stung like they've been stung in big matches historically in the last sort of 10 years or so, and they started losing these games, well, what would people say about Arteta then?
All right, well, for more on Arsenal's lack of fluency in attack, do head over to The Athletic and check out Amy Lawrence's match piece from the Emirates. Right, let's move on, because same story for Arsenal on the pitch, but there's plenty of change at executive level. We'll get into that one next. We've got Matt Slater with us, who's going to be talking more about how there have been some changes at executive level at Arsenal. But before that, David, you broke the news that Vice Chair Tim Lewis has left the club. How surprised are you by that news? But also, I guess the timing of it's quite interesting as well.
Yeah, I think it would have shocked many, because Tim Lewis has been so heavily involved in Arsenal's rise, and that features their 3 second-place finishes, as we mentioned earlier, their competitiveness on the European stage as well, their finances being in a much better state, and generally the club is healthier on and off the pitch. And they've been on an upward trajectory since the Kroenkes took full ownership in what was it, the summer of 2018. Tim Lewis was always their right-hand man. That's how he was described by many. He helped Stan Kroenke with the takeover initially, or the gradual investment. And he was always sort of on the scene at Arsenal, initially non-exec when he came in, and then he got the exec position. Fast forwarding to the sort of present day, integral to the summer transfer window that has bought them all of these players that many people are celebrating, certainly among the Arsenal fan base, helped give Arteta the squad that has really unprecedented depth, worked really well with Andrea Berta, Mikel Arteta, Edu previously to Andrea Berta. Certainly not everybody's cup of tea, and we'll come on to speak about that. I'm sure Matt will, in terms of Premier League circles, maybe inside Arsenal as well as outside. And so with all of that in mind, it was something you didn't forecast, nor did you forecast Daniel Levy leaving Tottenham so soon after the summer transfer window, so maybe a little bit of symmetry there. But certainly there's been a growing influence of Josh Kroenke on behalf of KSE, the ownership, and obviously Stan Kroenke, as he gets older, maybe that was a natural ascent. And we don't know all the ins and outs in these situations. Certainly it was a decision of the ownership. To my understanding, it wasn't Tim Lewis's call to leave his role. Arsenal's statement described it as stepping down, and whether he was offered something as an alternative to his role that he didn't accept, and that's why that terminology was used. But this was definitely their call.
Okay, definitely. We're going to get more into that in just a second. Matt, let's go back to Tim Lewis. Thanks for joining us, by the way. How will his exit from Arsenal be viewed by others in the Premier League, more importantly?
It's a good question. Everyone was shocked. You know, when David broke the story, I got a few messages, and there was surprise. You know, Daniel Levy-like surprise. I think David's already hinted that he divided people. So I got a few messages along those lines. And when I say divided people, I kind of mean they were pleased to see him go.
Okay. Stretch the point, Matt, there. Nice.
Yeah. However, I think, reading between the lines, Tim Lewis was a bit like Robbie Savage.
Oh. Did not think that name was going to be dropped in.
If he was in your team, you loved him. You loved him. He passionately fought Arsenal's corner, was consistent, straightforward, and there were no hidden agendas. He did his job for his club. But if he wasn't on your team, he was bloody annoying. Now, if he was to come to your team, you'd change your view because you'd be like, oh, that guy is absolutely putting a shift in for my club. So I think, because I've never met the guy, I have asked for an interview with him because I kept hearing how influential he was in Premier League shareholder meetings. And this goes back a few years. You know, he's been on the board there, I think, since 2020, and he's had this very senior position since 2023. Okay, so it's not a huge amount of time, but there's been quite a lot of upheaval in the room. And Lewis goes to meetings and he speaks in meetings. And in some of these meetings, you know, because people are having rows with the Premier League, they might have a very sort of specific sort of beef with another club. Who knows, right? There's lots of politics. Lewis has had a reputation for talking. You know, sometimes people think it's helpful. You know, he's a bright guy. No one has suggested otherwise. And we'll talk. Some people say pontificate. Some people say mansplain. Some people say bang on. But he expresses an opinion. Now that, like I said, has annoyed people at times. And of course, does this matter to fans, right? Probably not. I think the only time he's really kind of crossed over into the mainstream, like kind of being a story, and it's funny that we're talking today after a, you know, pretty eventful draw between Man City and Arsenal. The only time I can think that he became a story was a previous one, and it was a really exciting game. It was the Stay Humble game, where Tim Lewis, Man City, claim stormed out without shaking hands with his counterparts. Now, of course, Arsenal and Tim Lewis would say, no, we didn't storm out. I had to go. I was in a hurry. That was about the only time, you know, like I said, he's been back page. Now, Arsenal and Man City don't get on. They don't, because Arsenal have been on the opposite side of APT, financial fair play, the charges. You know, Arsenal, in the eyes of Man City and their fans, are red cartel.
If you've been in the Premier League over the past 10, 50, or well, 10 years or so, what are the points that, I suppose, you know, I mean, you kind of made the point, does this matter to fans? Probably not in terms of the person, but probably some of the issues that are most fiercely argued about now, whether that's PSR, cost controls, financial fair play across whichever competition we're talking about. I think Arsenal have been completely, as you just say, with regards to Manchester City, at the heart of that, and not just at the heart of, you know, wanting it, but trying to push it and make sure it's enforced and make sure it's not relaxed in any way. And also when Newcastle come along, making sure that there isn't a repeat of Manchester City by making sure that the rules are there. Would you say Arsenal were the key drivers of that, or kind of along? Because obviously, you know, Chelsea have changed over the last few years. Not that they were ever particularly on that train, but Manchester United have changed, I think, their mindset on it since a lot of people from Manchester City and Jim Ratcliffe came in. And it's also interesting that this coincides with the time where Daniel Levy is leaving Tottenham, or has left Tottenham. So you've actually got two of the fiercest advocates for this vision of football in the Premier League leaving at the same time. So I'm curious, Matt, how you think those two leaving at the same time, what impact that has around the table.
Well, I think that's really significant. So if you take the two together, you're taking out two of the most experienced, biggest, loudest, strongest personalities, British voices, who very much spoke for the rule book, concerns around sovereign wealth, concerns around people throwing money around. So they haven't just upset City and Newcastle. You know, other clubs have kind of bristled a little bit. Aston Villa, I've mentioned Newcastle already. You know, Chelsea around asset sales. You know, Arsenal, and this goes back a long. You know, it's no mistake that kind of Tim Lewis ended up there. One, he's a fan, right? But he has sort of personified a very long-standing Arsenal position. This sort of Bank of England club, traditional values. We've always been biggest club in London, old money. didn't like the fact that Chelsea came along 20 odd years ago, didn't like the fact that Man City came along 15. You know, it's sort of that, it's that persona they give off. And Lewis has embodied that. Now, you ask a really question like, well, is he just Arsenal? Has Tim Lewis led this? I think maybe at times it's looked like he's led this because he has talked. He's the guy in the meeting who talks. Liverpool, who, you know, are probably sitting there with their arms folded going, yeah, go on, Tim, go, keep going. Yep. You know, as are Man United at times, as are, you know, the middle-class clubs, who I think have at times appreciated Tim Lewis battering ram approach. So your Palaces, your Brentfords, your Bournemouths, who are all very concerned about big clubs being big, bullying people, galloping off into the distance. So, you know, Daniel Levy's done that as well. You know, Daniel Levy has been that voice in the room who kind of who kind of speaks for that old Richard Scudamore boardroom, that collegiate approach. Guys, we're in this together. So I think that is interesting, and it'd be really. I'm fascinated to see how this plays out. I think one thing that I was picking up in David's answer, and I think it's really, really for me because I haven't heard a great theory. I haven't heard the consensus view yet on why now. And the best I've heard, and it's kind of mine as well, is that this is about the Cronkies being more confident. This is about like the next generation of Cronkies, Josh basically, going, do you know what? I don't need anyone holding my hand anymore. You know, we're pretty good at this. We own the Rams, the Nuggets, the Avalanche. We get sport. We've done our apprenticeship here long enough. We're going to properly integrate our group now. David would probably know more about this than I. I'd certainly know more about this than I. I wonder how Lewis was working with the rest of the group.
Yeah, the fine detail may come out in time, and we don't have a huge amount so far. But I'm not aware of there being massive integration between KSE, certainly sports clubs, and Arsenal. There's obviously been Sean McVay and Mikel Arteta, and there may be other bits and bobs behind the scenes, but it's not like a multi-club system. I know there's only 2 football clubs within it, but there are some now pretty successful sports franchises in terms of the Nuggets and the Rams. You guys probably know better than me. I think there was quite significant change at the Nuggets that Josh Kroenke oversaw in terms of removing some long-standing executives and bringing in some new ones at a pretty critical time within the last year and replacing them with some younger blood. So there is some sort of precedent within the group for this.
Well, that's exactly what I want to finish on before Matt goes very quickly, Matt, is that, you know, we've seen this growing influence of American business in the Premier League. And, you know, right at the top of the podcast, we're talking about how much further do Arsenal have to go to get to where Liverpool are. Would you say FSG are sort of a good indication as to the standard?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it would seem that way now, wouldn't it? Because they're doing it on the pitch. But Arsenal have been really, really close. For you know, a stretch of time now, and I don't think Arsenal get enough credit really for the Emirates move and just the sort of success of that. I know it feels like ancient history now, but it's a great stadium. You know, it's full. It looks and sounds like a football ground. You know, they've done a good job there. They just need to win a title, and everyone would suddenly go, oh, you know, they're the gold standard. I think the, you know, that's football, isn't it? That's sport. But I think the thing that I would add to the Lewis, if you like, post-mortem, no, he's not dead. He is he has taken a sort of de facto leadership role within the league on negotiations with the EFL around the New Deal, and you know, his approaches can be a little bit belligerent, and there's certainly no love lost. There's no one grieving his exit in EFL circles, and that's clubs as well. They found him kind of tough to deal with, a bit patronising, frankly. Now, he's not here to defend himself. Like I said in my opening answer, I think he took his approach was what's best for Arsenal.
Okay, nice one, Matt. Well, we'll let you go. Appreciate your time as always. Speak soon. All right, so Liverpool are now 5 points clear at the top of the Premier League following their win over Everton in the Merseyside derby this weekend. 15 points from 15 for Arne Slot's side. Adam, are we already seeing Liverpool pull away in the Premier League race?
It feels that way. I don't think the performances are there. Now, there's two ways to look at that. On the one hand, it means there's a vulnerability that at some point may be exposed. I thought again against Everton, there was periods of the game, second half, where they were, they didn't look great. The flip side is they've kind of won 5 games without any of their new signings really looking like they've bedded in fully. You've had Gyokeres taken off in the first half of games. Wirtz, I think, has been pretty underwhelming so far. Obviously, Ekitike has done well, I should say that. But Isaac is obviously just kind of starting. So there's something a bit ominous about that. I think one of the reasons why Arsenal fans may have been a bit more annoyed yesterday is because of the game they've got next week, which is Newcastle away, which has really been like a graveyard for Arsenal the past couple of years. And that's going to be another really big test actually for Arsenal. And I think Liverpool have got a home game. I can't remember who they've got. They've got a pretty straightforward looking game. Palace away next week. And Palace, strangely, Palace are a lot better away than they are at home. I mean, although they're not easy to beat. But you would think that Liverpool win that game, and then it puts pressure on Arsenal again, right? It's, can they, are we going to be like 6, 7, 8 points, before the clocks have even gone back? And I think that's the worry. It's like they're getting away from us and they're so good. It's not just what Arsenal do, it's also, what Liverpool do. Equally, I think Arsenal knew at the start of the season they had a pretty tough opening. They knew they had to go to Man United. They won that game. So that's probably is that a game you expect to win? Over historically, it's been a bit tricky for Arsenal. So, that one they did okay. The Liverpool one, I think that was a disappointing result, but okay, it's your hardest game of the season. If you're going to lose a game, you probably lose that one. And then Man City, okay, you draw, but it probably just means they have to go to Man City later in the season and win, because it does feel like a year where it's going to be 90 points to win the league.
Yeah, and I guess it probably leads on to something Amy Lawrence has been speaking about in terms of Arsenal finding their fluidity and trying to click in real time against some amazing opposition as well. All right, that's the weekend's action discussed. Time to put your questions to David Ornstein. We've reached out through our YouTube channel and also picked out a couple for you as well, David. Let's get into the first one. This one says, "Hi, David. There is a lot of online chatter that seems completely sure that players like Sterling are getting a big check to essentially do nothing in seeing out their contract. Is this true? Surely a club that's as money-minded like Chelsea isn't going to do a deal where they are paying out millions of dollars for what's really an unproductive worker. It makes no financial sense. How do players' wages actually work? Do they still receive full wages regardless of whether or not they are playing?" Good question.
I think we need to get a contractual lawyer on the on the pod to explain that Raheem Sterling, like any other player, has rights. It was Chelsea who awarded him that contract, and they have obligations towards him. It's not his decision not to be playing. He clearly has fallen out of favour there. That's why he spent last season on loan at Arsenal, and he's now back at Chelsea. There were a couple of opportunities, even towards the end of the window, with Champions League clubs. But at that stage, we don't know the ins and outs of what was on offer. If it was a loan, which I've heard it was, from Bayern Munich, I think, on deadline day. But, this is somebody that will have his own personal reasons. It's been quite well documented in terms of wanting to be close to a young family and how supportive they have been of him in a very difficult period for him, footballing-wise. And so leaving them all to go on loan somewhere may not have been ideal. Probably if he would have left London, you would want some security in terms of a permanent move and a longer term contract. In the meantime, it's been reported over the last week that Chelsea and the PFA, Professional Footballers Association, have been in contact to ensure that minimum training standards are met, not just for Sterling, but for Axel Disasi as well. I mean, I think Sterling posted on social media a picture of training late at night, and we can make of that what we will. Enzo Maresca has had his say, sort of responding to claims that it could be having an impact on Raheem Sterling's mental health by saying, telling stories about his father and that the sort of hardships that he had in his life, and insinuating that the money is a comfort. I think we need to be very careful when we come to comparing sort of financial remuneration to somebody's mental well-being. And listen, there's no real fault here from what I can see. I understand both perspectives. The January transfer window is not far off. I presume they will all look again to find a solution to it then. I don't expect Raheem Sterling, like any footballer pretty much, to just say, oh, see you later, cancel my contract, I'll go for free, when there's something like £30 million worth on the deal he signed. These are two-way things. But equally, Chelsea probably aren't in a position to just give that to him to go and become a free agent and then sign elsewhere. So whether or not some conversations are going to happen to try and find a middle ground, I don't know. From everything we hear, Raheem Sterling wants to continue his career at the top level. Even he's 30 years old, I think, even has sort of England ambitions still. But right now that seems a pretty distant prospect. And yeah, to answer the question specifically, it's just the way contracts work, and there is a lot more to it than just saying, why are they paying somebody that's not playing? It's just a complicated situation, and it needs to be resolved.
All right, second question for you, David. What transfer deal in your time working in this area has taken you most by surprise?
There's some good contenders, but the one that springs to mind immediately is Arsenal signing Mesut Ozil from Real Madrid. And I remember vividly reporting that summer on how Arsenal were working on deals to sign both Karim Benzema and Angel Di Maria, which caught a lot of people by surprise given the magnitude of those two players. However, for a number of reasons, those two possibilities didn't evolve. And the one that did was Mesut Ozil. And we later found out that that was suggested by Florentino Perez to Arsenal because somebody had to go as an alternative to Benzema and Di Maria. And I think many people would remember the wry smile on Arsene Wenger's face when he was asked about it. I think after Arsenal played Tottenham, and little did we all know that Arsenal's transfer executives were busy trying to land a deal for Ozil, and then it got done before transfer deadline day. So yeah, that was one that definitely sticks in the mind from my career as being sort of wow. And there are many others over time. Definitely think back to before I was reporting on Luis Figo joining Barcelona from Real Madrid, crossing the divide. In my earlier days, I think you had Carlos Tevez, who had been at Man City and later moved to Man United. So yeah, there's lots, but even Eze to this day in the most recent market. But let's go for Ozil from Real Madrid to Arsenal.
All right, before we go, Adam, it's over to you for the final whistle. You know the drill now. You've got 60 seconds and you've got to tell us what's on your mind from the world of football this week. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, the clock starts now.
Well, this week, Chelsea and their goalkeepers. So Chelsea, I think, have started to look like a team that might go somewhere. You know, they obviously won the Club World Cup. But 5 minutes into a really big game at Old Trafford, Robert Sanchez comes blazing out of his penalty area, takes out, red card. The substitute goalkeeper, Jorgensen, did okay, probably should have come for that second goal, but I think it highlighted a weakness in Chelsea. And then I was looking back through how many goalkeepers Chelsea have sort of signed since Courtois left in 2018. So I think it's over 11 or more. So you've got Kepa, Jorgensen, Mendy, Sanchez, Penders, Petrovic, Slanina, Eduardo, I don't know who Eduardo is, Willy Caballero, Rob Green, Marcus Bettinelli, and that's almost 200 million euros. And look, some of them may go on to be fantastic, but for now, I think it is one of those issues. When you look at the goalkeepers like Raya, wow, it's such a big issue. It's such a big issue. 1 minute's not enough for this.
No, but you screwed yourself over by naming every single keeper that they signed.
Well, exactly. That's what I mean, right? It takes 60 seconds just to name the goalkeepers. I've proven the point.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's true though.
No,
True though.
it's a shame because I think Maresca's done a good job there, but I think it's going to hold them back.
Yeah.
I think it's a shame.
Okay, brilliant. Gents, that was really entertaining. Appreciate your time, Adam, David, and also Matt Slater, who joined us as well. And also thank you guys for watching as well. Hope you've enjoyed it. Leave us a comment as well if you haven't already. We'll see you soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.